If you've been watching my videos over the last couple of weeks, first of all, thank you for doing that, and thank you especially for all the comments that you've left. They've been insightful and instructive, not only for me, but I think for a lot of the people who've been watching these videos, if the comments on those comments by other viewers is any indication. I thought it would be good to give you a rundown on where I'm at now versus where I was in a number of the videos that I put out earlier. Some of you have expressed empathy and sympathy for the circumstances that I found myself in, and I'm grateful for that. But some of you, I suspect, think that I'm still in those sort of circumstances and that I'm still struggling through them. Well, I'm glad to say that the difficulties that I went through following my financial collapse and my divorce and all of the items and issues around the periphery of those have been pretty much resolved now, and I am stepping very much into my version of Act 2. So let me give you a bit of sort of chronology of what happened so that you have an understanding of how things unfolded and where I find myself now. First off, with regard to the financial issues, in the mid to late 2000s, I was going 100 miles an hour with my plans to build up wealth and establish a firm base for me and my family so that I could A, retire early, and B, we would be financially independent for the rest of our lives. Now, the bulk of my efforts were around property investment. First, I bought an apartment in a really good building opposite the Crown Casino in Melbourne. It was a 2-bedroom apartment with a very large terrace, and I was able to buy a second car park. So a 2-bedroom apartment, 26 squares with 2 car parks. And by the time I had to sell it in order to cover the difficulties that I was facing with subsequent properties, it was worth about double what I paid for it. And so from that, I thought, well, this is easy. Property investment is easy. As I watched the value of that property grow, I thought, this is a piece of cake. And that kind of spurred me on to buy more properties. And I went on to buy a number of sort of standard residential properties around the area that I lived, where they had subdivision and redevelopment and renovation potential, and went headlong into renovating those properties. 2 of them I subdivided and sold off the rear, and renovated the front property, which I kept and rented out. Now, over a period of a number of years, I ended up acquiring 5 properties, including the one that we lived in, until the GFC hit in the late 2000s, and the company that I worked for, which I still work for to this day, I've been with them for 28 years now as a consultant, but that company almost went broke. My wife worked for the company as well, and they had to let her go. And in an effort to stave off my sacking because of their financial issues, I offered to work for half the amount of money, which I did. So sort of overnight, I found myself with a number of properties which were in the middle of redevelopment and renovation and about a third of our normal family income, which was kind of devastating. I worked extremely hard to keep those properties afloat and continue with the redevelopments and subdivision and renovations and get them completed and hang on to what I could. But circumstances just made it impossible. And over a period of a few years, I ended up having to sell the properties that I had, with the exception of our principal place of residence. But I suspect that a lot of the tensions that arose around that, the incredibly long hours that I was working, because I was still working during the day, as well as renovating on weekends and often until 2 or 3 in the morning, as well as doing freelance work, as much work as I could to prop up these investment decisions that I'd made. And truth be told, I got greedy, I got impatient, and I was buoyed by the rapid growth in value of my first investment property, thinking, oh, this is easy, I can do this over and over again. But of course I was wrong, and you can never plan for everything, and you can never be too cocky when it comes to these kinds of things. So the long and the short of it is, while it looked on the surface like we were doing extremely well and heading to become independently wealthy and financially independent, the whole thing collapsed in the end over a period of a few years. And subsequent to that, so did my relationship with my ex-wife. And it got to a point where, 3 to 4 years went by and there was really no romance left in the marriage. If you can take from that whatever you want. Now, throughout all this time, I was a work from home dad. I chose that life so that I could spend as much time as I could with my daughters, which I did. Took them to and from school, took them to dance classes, all this sort of stuff. Spent as much time with my girls as I could. That combined with the long work hours and I guess my psychological absence from the marriage during that time. Bear in mind, for a long time we weren't getting along very well. We had sort of different values, different ideals, different principles, and it created a lot of tension. Ultimately, in May 2007, we both agreed that it was over, and I moved out. I moved out probably 10, 15 minutes up the road, so I continued to see my daughters all the time. They spent a lot of time with me on weekends. And following the sale of all those properties and the dissolution of our marriage and my reluctance to retain anything which my lawyer said I was rightfully due, I just basically surrendered everything that was remaining. And our last investment property, I said to my wife, you can buy for what it owes. And it was worth significantly more than what the loan outstanding on that property was. And so she got that property. By then I had fully renovated it with the help of my brother-in-law, and she moved into that property. She then went on to renovate it again and ultimately to knock the whole thing down and build a brand new home on that site, which is where she lives now with one of my daughters, and my eldest daughter moved out some time ago and lives in an apartment on her own. So some might find it incredulous that I went from 5 properties to no properties, no assets, and 140 grand in debt, but that's exactly what happened. I ended up with no houses. Some of the unsecured loans against those properties that were keeping things afloat were still owed once everything was sold off. And so I decided to take those on fully myself and deal with those. And it was only with the help of my new wife, who I met sometime after that, I was able to pay those down. And her and I then went on to work extremely hard for a number of years. We bought a business, built it up, sold it, bought another, built it up, converted it into a dual business, converted the upstairs part of the building into student accommodation, and then sold that, and then bought a third when she became pregnant with our son, Tommy. So she could just have a nice, simple job and have him with her during the day. That was a Video Easy rental store. I don't know if you remember those. But that was just basically buying a job for herself, a nice, simple job. And then we ended up selling that for what we paid for it to one of our old employees. So during that time, with the help of my wife, that 140 grand was paid down. And her and I worked hard to acquire our first home together. I moved out of the small unit that I had moved into when I left my ex-wife, and we renovated that property. I just got back from my little drive after recording this video and realised that it would be helpful if I explained how that 140 grand debt was paid down, because there was something that we did which made it a little bit easier. And it was only thanks to my wife that I was able to do this, and that was with the lenders, and I think there might have been 3 of them, is we negotiated a reduced settlement amount on those if they were paid out expeditiously. Now, because I didn't have the cash sitting in the bank to do that, I was only able to do it because my wife did. She'd been working hard her whole life, had been a live-in nanny, and just squirreled away her earnings. She didn't buy herself anything fancy. She's not interested in shopping, so she just saved her money. So thanks to the bank's willingness to negotiate smaller settlements if the debts were paid out faster, and thanks to the help of my wife who provided the funds to do that, I was able to pay down that 140 grand much quicker. I think it ended up being negotiated down to, might have been just under 100 grand, which is a significant difference. And so then I worked at, repaying her for her help in a number of different ways. And some of that was, just spending a lot of time working in the businesses that we bought together. And when I say we bought together, she bought, because I didn't have any money at that stage. And that all sort of came out in the wash over a period of years. But that's how that was done. I thought that might be useful to know. And then over time, we built up enough equity in that property to buy the house that we live in today. And that property that we moved out of became a rental property. And a few years ago, we then, with our combined equity and the home that we live in and that old home that we used to live in that was now a rental property, we pulled equity out of that, borrowed some more money and bought a third investment property. And now, in terms of our loan to value ratios, we are very, very conservative. We own the home that we live in, thanks largely to the efforts of my wife and the way we arranged our finances, where I paid most of the bills. She paid down the house, she paid school fees, I paid other stuff. So we've worked together as a team, and now we own the house we live in. The first house that we lived in together, that we bought together, that's now a rental property, that is now worth more than double what we owe on it. I think maybe triple what we owe on it. And the most recent purchase is now worth maybe $100,000 more than what we owe on that property. And, these are long-term investments. In the interim, we've invested in some Vanguard index funds, and through the advice of a close friend of mine who is in his 80s and has done very well for himself financially, despite coming to the country in his 40s with nothing, we are now also investing some money with his financial advisor, a fiduciary who is only paid by his clients for the advice that he gives. He's not paid commission on any of the products that he recommends. And so he does some direct investing for us. So, I think it's like a lot of things, that you can be, down in the dumps for a long time, but then as you turn the corner and you start to improve things, then over time, if you invest well, then that effect can become exponential and it can grow quite rapidly. It's just maths is all it is. Things can look very grim for a long time, but if you stick with it, you're consistent, you live below your means, you put money away automatically out of your income, and you don't touch that, you don't fiddle with it, you don't look at it, you don't mess around with it, you just let it do its thing, then the effects can seem slow at first, but then they can grow, and over time can grow quite rapidly. So that's been our story. So essentially, from say from the late 2000s up until now, 2025, I've gone from no houses, $140,000 in debt, no assets except for my car and a couple of small things, to now we live in a home that we own. We have 2 other investment properties. We now have reasonably nice cars to drive. I'm sitting here in a Porsche Cayenne that's 10 years old, cost me $50,000. And my wife drives a Porsche Macan, which it was actually the cheapest one in the country when we saw it. There were 700 of them for sale, and this was the cheapest one, $28,000. And, she doesn't drive very much, so that car will probably last her forever. And so we now enjoy some nice things. I sold 35 of my possessions a couple of years ago over a period of time to eventually have enough money saved to pay cash for a 2013 Porsche Boxster. And so, things can turn around if you're disciplined, patient, live below your means, and invest wisely rather than speculatively, which is kind of what I did when money was easy to get, cheap to borrow, but things were volatile. And you know how that turned out. So that's my story. If it seems a bit unbelievable that I went from 5 houses to no houses and $140,000 in debt and no assets, well, that's how it happened. It took some time to recover from that. It took an awful lot of work, a lot of late nights, and very simple, frugal living, but we got there in the end. And now I believe we're set up very well for the future, and we don't really have to stress about money anymore, which is a hell of a nice change from back in the late 2000s, when I'm surprised I didn't have another heart attack, because I had a heart attack years earlier due to stress, and I'm amazed that I haven't had another one since. But we're on the other side of it now, and things are looking pretty good. So I hope that clears up some of your questions about how this all happened and how it could go from something that's so bad to now something that is really quite good and stable and secure. That's how it happened. Anyway, if you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I read every single comment. as long as I'm able to on this channel, which seems to be growing very rapidly. I was up till 2:30 the other morning answering comments, but I figure if you take the time to write something, I at least want to read it. And certainly, if I can, I want to answer it. And so far, I think I've answered just about every single comment that's come through this channel since I started it. And I hope to continue doing that as long as possible. So thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.